concentrated. It's a high.
All right, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. If everybody can have a seat. We may have a few people join us as well. All right. That was quick. Thank you all. Well, thank you all for coming. My name is Dan Ignazewski, and I am the Executive Director for the Alliance for Eye and Vision Research. And today we are here to share some information and sort of help people understand the need for vision research funding, the importance of vision research, and the important role it plays, especially in the rare eye disease space. We're going to have some speakers that can speak to some of the research that's going on. We're also going to talk about some of the advancements that are happening in rare disease, specifically with Stargardt's disease and retinitis pigmentosa. And we are also going to have some patient advocates share their stories and their experiences with these diseases to help people understand the value and the importance of research, new treatments, and improvements to care. A little bit about the Alliance for Eye and Vision Research. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we essentially serve to, as the Friends of the National Eye Institute, and we serve to educate about the value of vision research, the impact that it can have on patients, and the importance of investing in vision research so that we can hopefully improve those outcomes. I want to express thanks to all of our partners that help make today's event possible. We have a number of them. The Association for Research in Vision and Ophthalmology, Foundation Fighting Blindness, Prevent Blindness, Research to Prevent Blindness, and the Vision Health Advocacy Coalition, all of our nonprofit and foundational sponsors, as well as Alkeus Pharmaceuticals, Genentech, and Johnson & Johnson for helping make today's event possible. We really couldn't do it without your all's support. And I think that this is a really great opportunity to help share information with Congress, but also the broader public around these diseases and some of the advancements that are happening. So thank you very much. So what is rare eye disease and what is rare disease? Ultimately, rare disease is conditions that affect a small portion of the population, usually around 3 to 6%. And about 72% of all rare diseases have a genetic component. So you'll hear a little bit about some of that today. Almost 3/4 of these diseases start during childhood. You'll hear some of that from our patient advocates as well as our researchers. One of the things that I really want people to understand is that rare disease, especially rare eye disease, really manifests in different ways. There are a number of different diseases that can manifest in different ways, and not only can it vary across diseases and conditions, it can vary patient to patient. So the experiences from everybody who experiences the diseases may be a little bit different, but overall they have some of the similar properties and challenges that manifest with these different diseases. So today we're going to talk about two inherited retinal diseases. We're going to focus on retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, and Stargardt disease. Retinitis pigmentosa you can think of as a narrowing in of your vision, so your vision sort of comes in on itself. Stargardt's disease is loss of focus in the central vision, and it progresses outward. So two very different approaches to or progressions of the disease to create progressive vision loss. But we're going to talk about each of those today with our speakers. As I mentioned, these conditions often have a genetic component, and they're not necessarily any early warning signs. If you have familial, if there's been some sort of familial background with these diseases, then you know that you may be at risk. But outside of that, oftentimes these diseases are not discovered or treated until you start to have vision loss or things start to affect your vision. And so it's really important that we get diagnosis early. It's really important that we identify how we can screen and how we can intervene early in these diseases so that we can improve outcomes. It's estimated that about 1 in 3,000 Americans have retinitis pigmentosa. About 1 in 8,000 Americans have Stargardt's disease. Inherited retinal disease is typically present with severe vision loss and progression. So it may start small, but typically evolves into significant vision loss. It can lead to complete blindness, but the way that these diseases progress can be very different, like we said. Regular eye exams are very, very important, especially for those that are at risk. And genetic testing, especially for those at high risk for these diseases or with a familial background, is vitally important so that we can address these things early. The last piece is vision disorders broadly are costing the Americans about $200 billion annually. So vision loss is a significant economic burden on the country, and it costs a lot for individual patients. Better treatments, better outcomes, we have a chance to try to improve those numbers and bring down some of the costs of these diseases with better treatments. Now I'd like to introduce one of our partners, the Vision Health Advocacy Coalition, which is one of our sponsors that help make today's event possible, to share a little bit more about what they do and how they are being strong advocates in the rare disease space and in vision overall. So, Lacey?
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to AVER, specifically Dan and Judy, for hosting today's briefing, and thank you all for attending today to learn more about rare vision conditions. I'm Lacey Teal, and I am a Senior Program Associate with the Vision Health Advocacy Coalition, or VHAC for short. VHAC promotes patient-centered policies that make services, devices, life-changing treatments more accessible for people living with vision conditions, such as thyroid eye disease, glaucoma, Sjogren's, macular degeneration, and diabetic retinopathy. Through our member organizations, many of whom are here today, we encourage the advancement of ocular science and innovation, educate patients, healthcare providers, and policymakers about access challenges, and promote better vision care delivery and advocate for access to prevention and appropriate treatment for all patients. Last year, VHAC released a policy paper on addressing the unmet needs for patients living with rare vision conditions, so I'd like to take a few moments to highlight that paper today. About 1 in 10 people in the United States live with a rare vision condition, yet 95% of those rare diseases have no FDA-approved treatment. So with that, rare diseases account for many of those rare conditions, which can be disruptive and debilitating. But little public awareness actually exists around these conditions, and as a result, patients often suffer in relative silence, which is why access barriers and access to treatment must be addressed. It typically takes more than for a patient to receive a rare vision disease diagnosis, and even after patients receive a diagnosis, still more barriers can present themselves. Pinpointing these challenges are an essential first step towards crafting solutions for these patients. Shortening the time span between initial symptoms and definitive diagnosis is key to improving these outcomes for patients with rare vision conditions. Genetic testing, which I know we're going to speak about a little bit later, is one of these options, but patients aren't always aware of that option or have access to it. Another barrier to diagnosing and treating rare vision conditions can be geography, race, or broader socioeconomic factors, which also can be addressed through policy solutions. That's why policies need to prioritize treatment and access so that once these treatments are available, patients can access them. Insurance cost-cutting tactics like prior authorization and step therapy should be minimized, and cost diversion tactics like copay accumulator programs need to be addressed as well. Bills like the Safe Step Act and the Help Copays Act would support patients by ensuring that they can access and afford their treatments, which is essential. As patients with rare vision conditions generally have few treatment options, innovation is also critical, which can be supported through policy. And resolute policymaking is needed to address innovation and reduce insurance barriers to treatment for patients. Unmet needs for people with rare vision conditions are multifaceted and widespread, but solutions are within reach, which is why we're all here today to learn how we can support these patients. So we encourage you all to prioritize research and access, and thank you for being an advocate for patients living with rare vision conditions. Thanks.
Thank you, Lacey. And AVER is a proud member of the Vision Health Advocacy Coalition and really supports the access piece. One of the things that we often say is, the research matters. We need to be able to do the research from the foundational side all the way through the clinical trials. But ultimately, if patients don't have access to the new treatments that are coming out, the research really isn't having the impact that it intended. And so not only do we need the research, but like Lacey mentioned, we really need to focus on that access to care and ultimately make sure patients can get the care that they need. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Abigail Fahim, who's an assistant professor of ophthalmology at the Kellogg Eye Center in Michigan. Abigail Fahim is a clinician scientist specializing in inherited retinal disease, and she's going to speak a little bit about retinitis pigmentosa, and she also has been involved with the alliances over her career. She's participated in our Emerging Vision Scientist program and has gone on to do some great work with some of our partners here today. So, Dr. Fahim, please. There you go.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Thank you for that introduction. As you said, I'm a physician scientist. I have a niche practice seeing patients with inherited retinal diseases, and these are diseases largely without treatment. And so a lot of my time is actually spent in research, most of my time, both in the lab and in clinical trials to move the field forward and help find treatments for patients. To change the trajectory of their disease and really of their lives, because these diseases have such a profound impact on patient lives. And so some of you may have heard bench to bedside. That's a very common phrase. It means we take laboratory findings from the laboratory bench and we translate them into treatments that we can take to the patient bedside. So that's our mission. So retinitis pigmentosa, also known as RP, it's inherited. It's the most common inherited retinal degeneration that we see, with an incidence of about 1 in 3 to 4,000, which is not that common, but it's one of the more common ones that we see. We see several cases a week in our clinic. It involves slowly progressive degeneration of the rods and cones, the photoreceptors in the retina that sense light and send vision to the brain. So the rods are affected first and then the cones. And the rods are responsible for vision in dim lighting and a lot of the side peripheral vision. And so patients first experience nyctalopia or night blindness, and that's followed by loss of their peripheral vision. And that can eventually result in tunnel vision, where the vision is clear in the center, but so much peripheral vision has been lost that the patients can be legally blind even though they see okay right in the center. And so here I have a photo of a healthy retina on the left with the optic disc, the blood vessels, and healthy retinal tissue. And on the right is a retina with RP. So the optic disc is pale, the blood vessels are very thin and hard to make out. And you see all of these like mottled white spots, and more noticeably these specks of black pigment called bone spicules. This is a hallmark of the disease. It's actually kind of like a type of scar tissue that's happening because of death of the retina cells. And there are no treatments for this. So RP has a profound impact on patient lives. The age of onset varies, but it often will start in adolescence or early adulthood. And this is a time when people are just starting their careers or becoming primary caregivers for their families. And we frequently have to tell our patients that they can't drive anymore. And as the disease progresses, they have trouble navigating in unfamiliar places. They find it harder to work. And all of this leads to loss of independence and can lead to high rates of anxiety and depression. And a lot of our patients fall into this gap where their vision's not good enough to drive, but they're not legally blind yet, and they can't drive to work. And there's not any support for them. Not everyone has access to public transportation where they live. So a lot of times I'll tell my patients not to drive, and they say, well, what do? I have children. They have school, they have activities, I have a job, what do I do? And I don't always have great answers for them. And there are a lot of simulations of RP that you can find on YouTube. See if this one will play if I just do that. Good. I like this one because it shows the progression. Okay, so it starts out normal. Okay, and then as things move along, you can start to see some darkness around the edges, but it's still pretty good. And then as things progress and the darkness comes closer to the center, by the end you can understand why this person would have trouble navigating by themselves, would run into people, would trip over things, and would lose independence. And unfortunately, in the late stages, the central vision can be lost as well.
And how much time it takes to progress this?
So that varies. That can vary quite a bit. On average, and it can vary by gene, on average, patients lose about 10% of what's left of their visual field per year, but it's of what's left. So it's not like in 10 years they have no field. So it's slow. It's slow. Yeah. There are many genes that can cause RP, and this is a graph showing the timeline of discovery of inherited retinal disease genes overall. So not all of these genes cause RP, but there are over 100 genes now known to cause RP. And these are genes that are important for rod function and rod survival, and in some cases cone function too. However, despite these advances in discovering genes that cause RP, we still don't know all the genes yet. So when we do genetic testing, we find the answer up to 2/3 of the time, which still leaves 1/3 of patients without a genetic diagnosis. So there's a lot more work to be done. And furthermore, even when we can find a genetic cause, the question remains, how does that genetic defect lead to the retinal degeneration? And that has been the topic of a lot of great research over the years, elucidating the mechanisms of retina cell death in RP and why that happens with the different genetic mutations. And all of this research has led to several clinical trials in RP. So this is a table of current active clinical trials for RP. I made this table from trials culled from the Foundation Fighting Blindness website, which is a great resource for patients to see kind of what research is going on. And you'll notice that many of these trials are for specific genes only, and that's because a lot of these are gene therapy trials. So for gene therapy, we're replacing the defective gene, so it's only going to apply to patients who have mutations in that specific gene. There's been one FDA-approved retinal gene therapy called Luxturna for a gene called RPE65, and that typically causes it's a little different from RP. It's labor congenital amaurosis, very early childhood onset. And that was in 2017. And despite lots of gene therapy trials since then, we still don't have another approved retinal gene therapy. But with so many genes in trial right now, we are still hopeful. And then the trials lower down that say they're for all genes that cause RP, these are what we call gene agnostic trials, meaning they're not targeting any particular gene, they're targeting some common pathway of cell death in RP. So for example, this N-acetylcysteine trial, it's called NAC-ATTAC. We're a site for it at University of Michigan. N-acetylcysteine is an antioxidant. It's actually an over-the-counter supplement. It's used a lot clinically, most notably for Tylenol overdose to protect the liver. And they did a small study with 30 RP patients showing that it improves cone function. So now they're doing a large multi-site trial to see if it can slow down RP over a 4-year time period. And that trial, by the way, is funded by the NIH. It's an investigator-initiated trial starting at Johns Hopkins. It's funded by the NIH. And so, that's an example of the NIH funding this sort of late stage clinical work, although usually those trials are funded by industry sponsors. The other thing you might notice is that the majority of trials on this table are in phase 1/2. With a few in phase 2 and only 2 in phase 3. It's partly because a lot of phase 1 and 2 trials never make it to phase 3, and we'll talk about that. So what happens in a clinical trial? Well, there's lots of different phases to clinical trials, and a lot of work actually has to be done before the trial ever begins, as you can imagine. So the preclinical work for a clinical trial can go on for years. There's no time limit on that. Scientists and clinicians have to work out the fundamental biology behind a disease and why it's happening, often with the help of animal models or cell culture models in a dish. On the slide here, I've shown a mouse. That's one of the most popular animal models used for human diseases. And then the investigators have to test a potential therapy in the animal model. And then the therapy has to have biologic plausibility, meaning we should have some understanding of why or how the therapy would work based on what's known about the biology of the disease. And then the treatment in the animal model should generally show safety and some sign of being effective in improving the disease outcome. And then a sponsor who's actually going to invest the money for the clinical trial, usually a company, will apply for an IND, an investigative new drug application, or permission to run a clinical trial. And then the sponsor will start a phase 1 trial. The purpose is to assess safety of the new drug and sometimes determine dosing. So sometimes there's a dose escalation, starting with a low dose, then if it's safe, escalating to higher doses. And often for IRD or inherited retinal disease trials, the phase 1 will have patients in late stages of disease who have already a lot of vision loss. And next is phase 2. The investigators and the sponsors are starting to look for an efficacy signal. They're measuring and looking for some sign that the treatment is effective before doing a big phase 3 trial. So phase 2 provides the preliminary evidence for efficacy, and often they're still looking for safety in this phase. And so these days, a lot of sponsors will combine phase 1 and 2 together into one trial. That can save time and money. And in phase 3, this is the opportunity the investigators and the sponsors have to prove that the treatment works. So there's often randomization of subjects to receive either the treatment or a sham or placebo. There's a large number of patients. And at the end of the phase 3 trial, the sponsor can apply for the new drug application to get FDA approval and market the drug commercially. So in some ways, that's the end. But sometimes there's also a phase 4 when the sponsor collects real-world post-market data on efficacy and safety in real patients, because sometimes the reality is different from the clinical trial. Patients don't always come for follow-up appointments. They don't always take the drug as prescribed. And also, there's a sort of a different group of patients taking the drug in real life, because in the trial there's inclusion and exclusion criteria, a very specific type of patient that they're looking for to prove that there's a treatment effect over a short time period. Whereas the reality after the drug is approved is that patients with the disease who don't fit that criteria but could still benefit are also taking the treatment. So despite that kind of easy breezy, linear, clean timeline I showed you, the sobering reality is that less than 10% of investigational drugs that enter clinical trials get FDA approval. And there are a variety of reasons for that. That could be a whole separate talk. But what I want to show you is that the bench-to-bedside process is really more like a pyramid. So step 1 is target identification, trying to figure out what is the most important molecule or pathway that you have to target to make a difference in the disease. And a lot of promising targets get discovered, and then not all of them can be validated. When I was a trainee and going to conferences, kind of shows you how naive and clueless I was. I saw a lot of great data and got really excited, like, wow, these people are going to cure RP, or they're going to cure X or Y. And then a few years later, it's like, well, what happened to that? I haven't heard anything about that. There's not a clinical trial with that. And with time, you realize that actually, like, the majority of findings don't end up translating. And the joke is that we've been curing cancer in mice for decades, right? So, it doesn't always translate. But the validation step is next, and that means you're retesting your hypothesis from different angles. You're using different models, different techniques. You're trying to convince yourself and everybody else that this pathway, this molecule, it really is the right target and really is important. And then you start developing compounds or screening compound libraries or making your gene therapy or whatever it is that you want to use to hit your target. And then that has to be optimized for safety and efficacy. And then you test it in your animal model, and then you start the clinical trial. And even of the products that make it all the way down to the clinical trial part of the pyramid, only 10% get to the very bottom of FDA approval. And so what I want to tell you is that industry sponsors don't get interested until like the third row of that pyramid. All the work identifying and validating targets is done by academic science labs. Pharmaceutical companies generally are not doing this work because it's too high risk. Okay, so a discovery up at the top has a much lower chance of ever making it all the way down to the bottom. Once a target has been identified and validated in the academic science space, then it becomes interesting to industry, and they're willing to get involved. And sometimes even the work developing the treatment is done in the academic space, and then it's even more de-risked for industry to get involved and partner. So it's the academic science labs all over the country and the world that are feeding the industry-sponsored drug discovery. And in science, we do this for a lot of reasons. We love science. We want to learn more about the disease. And we know that even if our discovery about this specific pathway doesn't directly lead to the treatment, we know that we're answering questions about the disease that weren't known before, and none of that knowledge is wasted. And our discoveries that we're making will, at some point, contribute to a better understanding of disease and better treatments in the future. And so we do all of this work, and it's funded not by industry, it's funded largely by the National Institutes of Health. Okay, so the NIH, our federal government, is funding the top of this pyramid. And in my job as a clinician scientist, I get to participate across the spectrum. So I have a lab where I'm doing target identification, and I also work down at the bottom. I'm an investigator for several clinical trials. And I'm hoping that my work in the lab eventually leads down to the bottom into, translating into treatments. I have a lot of great mentors for this at the University of Michigan. I have a colleague who developed a gene therapy in her lab that was then licensed by industry. I have another colleague who discovered a molecule in the lab to help rod and cone survival, and that's now in clinical trial. And I have another colleague, these are all different people at University of Michigan, who went through the entire pyramid. He made a discovery in his lab that translated into a treatment that was FDA approved and is now a great treatment for Graves' eye disease. And so we have precedents for this. This is how the process works. There's no way to cut corners. There's just no way around it. And we have to fund the top of this pyramid. If we don't feed the top, then a few years down the line, we're going to pay for it at the bottom. And you can think of it as a supply chain issue. And the modular budget for for R01 grants from the NIH, this is like the main workhorse grant, has been $250,000 a year for the last 25 years. And it was set in 1999, it hasn't changed. So what's gotten more expensive in 25 years? Literally everything. Everything has gotten more expensive, and science has gotten a lot more expensive. And we're expected to do more with less, except we don't control how much science costs. So it's like this impossible riddle that's getting harder to solve. Okay, so this is a quick summary of my own personal work in the lab in the first step of the pyramid, which is target identification. So I study an inherited retinal disease called choroideremia, which is a lot like RP. From the patient perspective, it's kind of identical to RP. They have death of rods more than cones, and they experience night blindness and peripheral vision loss, so kind of exactly like RP. And we're investigating proteins secreted by these retinal pigment epithelial cells, or RPE cells. RPE cells secrete a lot of proteins, and we have reason to believe that the proteins secreted by RPE and choroideremia are damaging the retina. And so we're studying those proteins, and we're doing that by using stem cells to make RPE cells. So we use induced pluripotent stem cells that are made from adult tissues. So I could take a blood sample or a skin sample from myself or any of you, and we could make stem cells out of them, and then we can make retina cells. And so we've done that for healthy cells and choroideremia cells. And we're looking at the differences in protein secretion, which are on that graph. Each little dot is a protein secreted by these cells, with some proteins secreted more in healthy cells and some proteins secreted more in choroideremia cells. And we're really interested in the outliers, the ones that are really different between choroideremia and healthy. And so we're focusing on those. And now we're seeing what the effects of those proteins are and studying that in various ways. And so this is just, all this work is funded by the NIH. So my lab has a National Eye Institute K08 grant, and we have submitted an R01 grant. So this is just one example of government funding of eye research in the first part of the pyramid that hopefully will one day trickle down to the bottom part of the pyramid. And this is the type of work that happens at academic medical centers, which integrate their clinical and research missions to advance translational disease-focused science that aligns with the mission of the National Institutes of Health. And this is my clinical team in the Inherited Retinal Disease Clinic and the laboratory team who does the basic science work. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Fahim. Now we are going to share some information about Stargardt's disease, and we are. I really want to emphasize some of the things that Dr. Fahim mentioned. Is without the funding and the support for vision research at the NIH level, specifically within the National Eye Institute, we're not going to have those pipelines in the future and those advanced treatments that industry will pick up and take on to bring to ultimate treatments for patients. And so really, really important to be able to do that. And actually, our next speaker will be able to speak to some of that as well. Our next speaker is Dr. Leonid Saad, who's the president and CEO of Alkeus Pharmaceuticals. Developed and pioneered the treatment for ALK-001 for Stargardt's disease, and has secured funding to be able to advance the science in that space to the point where we're getting to the point where we're at the clinical trials and we're moving forward with opportunities for drug development. So, Dr. Saad.
So good morning, everyone. We're hearing a lot of great stories on the challenges related to how to take research to patients. It's very hard. So today I'll tell you a little bit about my story, how I got into this. I'm a scientist, but I've always wanted to have an impact in a way that if I'm not doing it, it looks like no one else will. And so that's how I started Alkeus. I'll tell you more about the story of Alkeus and how both FDA and NIH, National Institutes of Health and National Institute funding positively impacted our company and our clinical research. The development of these treatments for serious blinding conditions. Today, Stargardt's disease is really our focus. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about this story. I won't get too much into the detail of Stargardt's disease, but Dan mentioned a little earlier, Stargardt's disease is a rare inherited serious condition that leads to blindness, starting in childhood and adolescence. It leads to blindness more in the center part. So I like to call patients with Stargardt disease, they need to be big picture type of people because they don't focus very well anymore. This disease affects children and adolescents. In terms of progression, when pediatric patients start having symptoms, they will reach, 50% of them will reach the point of legal blindness within 3 years of initial symptoms. So it's a fast progressing condition and no treatment exists. We estimate approximately 30,000 patients in the United States. RP that was discussed earlier is probably around 100,000 patients. So it's fewer patients, and that makes this disease even harder to treat. The good news, in a way, is that there's only one gene, or at least for the vast majority of patients, there's only one gene involved. And so if we understand this gene very well, maybe we can push the treatment down the pyramid. Every year, approximately 1,500 new patients are diagnosed. And this condition, and it's really incredible when we hear that, it's the third largest monogenic disease, monogenic recessive disease. So we hear a lot about when there's lots of genes involved. In the case of RP and Stargardt disease, there's only one gene involved. And when a condition is called recessive, and that includes, for example, conditions such as sickle cell disease, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, and here listed CF, PKU, and spinal muscular atrophy. Stargardt is the third largest of these monogenic recessive disease, and yet out of the top 6 of monogenic recessive disease, Stargardt is the only one with no treatment available. In June 2022, the FDA hosted an externally led, patient-led listening session. And during that listening session, some of you were actually participants in that listening session. We heard patients, and we heard their voice with respect to how challenging this condition is to them. So a patient said, "What I saw yesterday, I can't see today." Another one said, "I'll never get my driver's license. I wanted to be a pediatrician." And these patients, a lot of them have to change their plans. A patient said, "I want to play basketball, but now I can't see the coach or the scoreboard." Patients are pediatric patients. They need to go to school and continue thinking about, and as you know, kids are not super tolerant. And so a lot of them would rather be considered dumb than blind. So one said, "How can I go to school if I can't see anything?" And finally, a patient said, "My ability to draw or create kept getting worse, and it felt like a part of my soul was dying." Minutes of this important listening session as part of the patient-focused drug development framework are now available on the FDA website. Challenges of the visually impaired are real, and they're often underappreciated. Patients who are visually impaired are more likely to be unemployed, living under the poverty line, be victim of violent crimes, being depressed, we heard that earlier, less likely to graduate from high school or a college degree, and less likely even to look for a job. What we do as researchers, as scientists, as company builders, is we want to change that. We want to make sure not only the patient's voice is heard, but we want to make sure that these statistics are not statistics anymore, and that patients' life is improved. Since 2010, Alkeus Pharmaceuticals has been on a mission to transform lives by developing the first potential treatment for Stargardt's disease. I started this company 14 years ago now, just to give you a sense of the timelines. It takes a very long time, it takes dedication, it takes being relentless and having grit and not giving up. It's really easy to give up. Why do we give up? Because getting a drug on the market is quasi impossible. Every drug that lands on the market is a miracle. Since I started Alkeus, and when I started Alkeus, there was no treatment for rare eye disease. Today there are only 3. Luxturna, mentioned earlier, for Leber congenital amaurosis, a monogenic form of blindness also that affects less than 1,000 people in the United States. So the drug is called Luxturna, was approved in 2017. Second one for a form of corneal disease called neurotrophic keratitis, got an approval in 2018. Finally, thyroid eye disease, a drug called Tepezza, got approval in 2020. That's very few drugs available for rare eye disease. 95% or more of patients who are diagnosed with a rare eye disease will not have a treatment available. Just to give you a sense of, and we saw what the pipeline looks like for RP, since I started Alkeus, there has been 20 other companies that have attempted to treat Stargardt's disease. All of them have discontinued treatments and their program. What kept us going? Federal funding, nothing else. We had no money when I started this company. Without federal funding, we would never have been able to make any progress in the clinic. Since 2012, we've been receiving federal funding to support clinical trials of gilduretinol, also known as ALK-001. First, we received a National Eye Institute grant that enabled, we actually received several grants. One that enabled the phase 1 clinical trial, and one that enabled our phase 3 clinical trial in age-related macular degeneration. We also received grants from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA also fund grants, and we received multiple grants to fund our research in gilduretinol phase 2 for Stargardt's disease. This federal funding has been instrumental for both the discovery in the earlier stages and the development of gilduretinol, as well as other new drugs for serious diseases. It's critical not only that we continue, but possibly increase this funding to enable us to continue developing these treatments. As you saw, there's only 3 treatments for rare eye disease. Timing-wise, it's been 14 years. 14 years of hard work. I started the company in 2010 with family and friends funding. In 2011, we obtained positive data in mice, on mice vision. 2012, as I tell you, and since then, we've been supported by NIH. We started a phase 1 clinical trial in safety in 2014, followed by a phase 2 in advanced stage Stargardt's disease in 2015. At the time, this was the first randomized controlled clinical trial for Stargardt's disease in the world. As Dr. Fahim mentioned, people try to make a phase 1 and phase 2 together. That's what we did. We actually even try to make it a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 together, because it's just so hard to find these patients. It took 2.5 years to enroll sufficient patients to do that study, and another 2.5 years to get to the data. It was a total of 5 years, 4 months, and 3 days before we got to the final results. The results were positive, indicating that gilduretinol can slow the progression of advanced stage Stargardt disease by approximately 30%. This doesn't stop the disease, it slows it down. So we started another trial, a phase 2 in early and moderate stage Stargardt disease. These are actually 2 trials. In 2024 at ARVO, about a week ago, we announced and presented results in 3 early stage patients, indicating that the drug gilduretinol could potentially arrest the disease progression in these young teenagers just diagnosed with Stargardt, who after 6 years of continuous treatment have not showed any progression, and they started asymptomatic. They had a symptomatic older sibling, but the asymptomatic child continued to stay asymptomatic after 6 years of continuous treatment. Based on these data, we're able to finally raise capital from venture capital. It took us 12 years. And we raised $150 million. This money looks big, but this is how much you need to spend if you want to get a treatment to patients. We now are planning on submitting a new drug application to the Food and Drug Administration at the end of this year, or before the end of this year. And we hope that gilduretinol could become the first treatment for Stargardt disease. To give you a little bit of key figures of what we did, we received $4.5 million in federal funds. With $1 less, we would never have been able to do what we did. We did all of our program with $4.5 million in federal funding and friends and family for the first 12 years. No one has done this before. I'm not doing it again. We've interacted, and because we're so patient-focused and so patient-centric, we want to change this patient narrative. We want to help patients. We've interacted with over 4,000 Stargardt patients over the past 14 years. We've enrolled over 400 patients in our clinical trials located in 20 states. The list of states is listed below. The youngest child that we treat now, he's 8 years old. Our longest treatment duration is 7 continuous years. I started with single employee. We're now over 30 full-time US employees, plus 25 key consultants. We're going to continue to grow maybe to 150 people within a year. We've published 11 times in scientific and peer-reviewed publications. And as I told you, we've received $150 million in private funding, which really helps us grow to the next level. Because we're so patient-committed, our number 15 employee, Julia Carpenter-Conlin, is here in the room and helped us create a new site called Euronorth Starg. Because when patients get a diagnosis, they don't know where to go. They lose focus. We want to help them be more familiar with their condition, give them the right resources. Advocacy is a key piece of any drug approval. As a scientist, just like Dr. Fahim, I was very naive. I thought that data was sufficient alone to get a drug approval. Patient advocacy is just as important, and that's why I'm here also today. On Euronorth Starg website, you'll find videos of patients. Here are 2 videos of 2 of our patients who you can listen to their voice, you can listen to what they've done, and there's all sorts of patients. These are patients who've been able to adapt and adjust successfully. They work really hard to do that. I invite you to go to euronorthstarg.com as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and my contact information is here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Saad. We are now, that's actually a perfect transition as we are now going to hear from a couple of patient advocates. We've been fortunate enough to have some patient advocates here to be able to share some of their experience of what it's like to live with these diseases. And so as a result, I want to invite Adrienne Kiev up to talk about her experience with Stargardt's disease. Adrienne?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Adrienne Kiev, and I have Stargardt disease. When I was about 8 years old, I saw an optometrist because I was having trouble seeing the board in school. And that optometrist told me and my family that I was making up my sight loss for attention. Several years later, I did get a diagnosis of Stargardt disease that has since been confirmed with genetic testing. So I was indeed telling the truth. This story is something that I hear a lot when I talk with other folks who have Stargardt disease, and we just need to make sure that people are aware that these conditions are out there. They do affect every part of my life. When I was young, as I said, I had trouble in school. I was in the talented and gifted program when I was young, and I eventually just ended up getting by in high school and barely graduating. But I did go to college and dropped out after my first year because I did not have the assistive technology that I needed to be successful in school. I didn't know how to ask for those things. I didn't know that there was help out there for that. So I just dropped out and eventually got a job somehow. Somebody in Iowa thought they could give me a driver's license. So I did drive with a limited driver's license for a while. Then one day, I almost hit a pedestrian that I never saw until I was past her. I went home and I did not drive after that. I had to make that choice to give up my driver's license. It made my life much more difficult. Eventually, I had to leave my job because I was not able to get there. There was no public transportation in Iowa, where I grew up. So I was at home, 25 and unemployed and no transportation and not sure what I was going to do. It took a really long time to figure out how to just how to function as someone who is blind. It wasn't something that was shown to me as a child. They didn't go over, how to ask for help. So I didn't ask for help. I didn't know that I could. When I did find out that you can advocate for yourself, things got a little bit easier, but it took 15 years to figure that out. And it only took 15 years to kind of be comfortable being blind, and another 15 to figure out how to be good at being blind. And the nature of Stargardt disease, it is progressive, so you adapt and you adjust, and then in a couple of years you need to do it again because you've lost more vision. So it's a continuous process. It's exhausting. I try and explain my sight loss to folks, and it always changes, so they never know how to help. So I have central vision loss. That means I wrote these cards out, and now that I'm up here, I cannot read my cards. I don't have a PowerPoint because I won't be able to read the laptop. So, I have told my story a lot, so I don't really need the cards, but it's really difficult to explain to people that you can't see when you look like you can see. I have pretty severe light sensitivity as a result of my Stargardt disease, which is why I'm wearing my dark glasses today. I have a lack of depth perception, so if I don't have my cane, I may trip over a curb. I'm not able to read standard print. I haven't been able to read standard print probably in about 20 years. So it's a really difficult thing to live with every day. That is why this funding is really important to help advance this research for these treatments and cures. It has affected my life in such a profound way to have Stargardt disease, and it's been so difficult, and I wouldn't want that to happen to any other child. If there's anything that I can do to help move this mission forward. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Adrian. And now I'll introduce Eric Fulton, who's also a patient advocate and has experience with retinitis pigmentosa. So, Eric?
Thanks, Dan.
Yep.
I'm glad that Dan moved his laptop. With the little amount of sight I have left, I realize that I am wearing the same tie today that is in my headshot. So I want to thank Dan and Judy for the opportunity. The scientists who spoke before, all of you who are here, and Adrian, I also have an almost hit a pedestrian story, which is not part of my remarks, but I want you to know you're not alone in that. And no, I no longer drive. But thank you all for being here. My name is Eric Fulton. I am going blind from retinitis pigmentosa, or RP, which we learned about earlier today. It is a sad family tradition. My mother completely lost her sight to RP. I have a brother, an uncle, and a cousin who are also going blind from RP. 2 years ago, my 13-year-old son was diagnosed as well. So I'm here today to ask for your help in breaking this vicious cycle in my family and the millions of others across the country. I'm here today so that my son doesn't suffer the way that I have over the course of my life. And I'm here today because I firmly believe that a cure is in sight, and we just need manpower and resources to get there. So I was diagnosed with RP when I was 13. It was life-changing, it was depressing, but it was not a surprise. As we heard earlier, RP is genetic and hereditary, and I grew up in a house with a blind mother. She never drove a car. She always used a white cane to navigate. She was functionally sightless for her entire adult life. She passed away last year, and she never saw her grandchildren's faces. In a way, and I think Adrian just spoke to this, in a way I was consider myself very fortunate to have a blind role model in my family. Blindness it's isolating, it's frustrating, and it's scary. And whether it happens suddenly due to trauma or slowly over time, it's an insanely difficult transition to make. You know, a lot of visually impaired people don't have that built-in support. Adrian just spoke to that. Feelings of depression, hopelessness, common in the blind community. Still, knowing my family history, it didn't lessen the mental and emotional impact of my own diagnosis. You know, I stand here today able to talk about it, even joke about it, but it has taken years of conversation and introspection and therapy to get me here. And quite honestly, I might break at some point in my remarks. So I guess it's a good time to talk about a little bit about how and what I can see. Abigail showed a great video, but I can give you kind of a first-person analysis here. RP manifests itself through poor night vision. So in my case, I knew something was different. In my early 11, 12 years, I was a Boy Scout, and my eyes never adjusted to the dark the way other people's did. I always had to have the biggest flashlight. And this was before LED lights and before phone cameras, so it was like those big like halogen things that I was carrying around. In my son's case, we took a family trip to the Grand Canyon when he was 9, and at night, my wife and my daughter were looking up at the stars, which you can't see in this area, and he couldn't see them. He wasn't diagnosed until 2 years later, but we knew that day. So for me, through my teenage years, I couldn't really see much at night or in low light, and that's hard to explain. Again, Adrian, we have a lot of parallels, because during daylight, during normal conditions, it appears as though that I am perfectly sighted at that time. But when the sun goes down or the lights go out, your ability suddenly changes. There's an infamous story among my high school friends, and I am far out of high school. We were all hanging out in a park one night, and I had to be physically restrained from walking down an embankment and directly into a creek. I didn't see it, I didn't know it was there, and I was embarrassed, but it helped explain my condition. RP is progressive and degenerative. It slowly destroys the retina. And so what that means is my vision is always changing, and it's always getting worse. So after taking your night vision, RP slowly steals your peripheral vision. We heard that earlier. Eventually you're left with a pinhole of sight and extremely sensitive to bright lights and glare. That's about where I am. There was a video that Abigail showed earlier, but the way that I explain it is at this point, it's like looking through the back end of a pair of binoculars with Vaseline smeared on the lenses. The next phase attacks your central vision, and eventually there'll be nothing left. Being visually impaired or blind it's being constantly vulnerable, whether that's physically or emotionally. If you go out to lunch today or you take the metro home, stop at an intersection, close your eyes, and cross the street. Or, imagine being on a first date at a restaurant and you need to use the restroom and you have to ask your first date to help you navigate to the restroom, and would you mind waiting outside so that you can help me get back to my seat? So despite my condition, though, I do consider myself fortunate. I have a wife, I have 2 great kids, I have a supportive circle of friends, and they all help me get to the bathroom pretty regularly. I have a full-time job, it accommodates my disability, and most importantly, it has great health insurance. In those ways, I'm fortunate, but many other blind people are not, and you saw some of those statistics earlier. Around 70% of blind people are unemployed. Going blind, it takes away your sight, it takes away more than that. It takes away your independence, it takes away your self-esteem, and it takes away your motivation. People who do not have proper health care, disability support services, or transportation, don't live in an urban, pedestrian-friendly area, they're at an even further disadvantage. I honestly wouldn't wish blindness on my own enemies, and my own family can't escape it. I see 4 different eye doctors on a regular basis. I'll admit that's more than most, even by RP standards. Thank you to my health insurance. But the reason I do this is because RP is still such a puzzle. Between the genetic component, there's the nonlinear timeline of losing your vision and managing what's left of my visual acuity. It really takes a village. So again, my thanks to the doctors, the scientists, and the researchers in the room. I've said a couple times in my remarks that I consider myself fortunate, and you'd be right to sit there and look at me like, how can you consider yourself fortunate? You're going blind and it sounds awful. And I want to be clear, it's awful. But I consider myself fortunate because right now, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be blind and have hope. 20 years ago, sage medical advice for people like me with retinitis pigmentosa was wear sunglasses when you're outside. 10 years ago, there were no treatments or cures for RP. And we can't quite say that anymore. And you've heard some of that today. Treatments are coming online. Hope is on the horizon. We heard earlier about Luxturna. It was the first gene therapy approved by the FDA. It's one of a handful. It's slow, but it's happening. My own mother, in her later years, she was one of the first people in America to receive the Argus 2 implant. And just consider that a bionic eye. And what it did is it restored a little bit of her sight, and she was able to perceive light, shadows, and shapes. But these innovations were years in the making. Again, you saw that earlier, how long it takes, how it builds on each other. These breakthroughs, they were built on the work of previous research. Life's changing treatments and cures like these, they depend on the research, the experimentation, and funding of the National Eye Institute and other early stage adopters. In my mother's case, there's actually a direct line between funding from the NEI and her being able to see fireworks for the first time in decades. So that's why I consider the National Eye Institute, NIH, and other institutes so critical. Their early stage research they promote and fund can lead to life-changing results for millions of Americans. And there are dozens, if not hundreds, of promising studies and clinical trials in the works. Again, you saw that bottom-down pyramid there, that there's a wide net, but it gets narrow and narrow and narrow. And that's our hope, is that narrow part at the bottom. And I keep hitting that because I can't see that. The science is moving faster than ever in our history, but we're close. I really think we're getting closer to stopping blindness, preventing vision loss, and reversing the devastating effects of conditions like RP. Now, we can be the generation that cures blindness for millions of Americans, improves their lives of people like me and people like my son. And so that's why I'm here today. I'm here to urge your support for initiatives that advance vision research, improve access to care, and fund efforts to enhance the quality of life for those of us who are living with these devastating conditions. So, thank you very much.
All right. Hopefully that comes back up. There we go. Well, thank you very much. I think you had a chance to hear from the patient perspective about how important research is, ultimately how important it is that we invest in research and improve access for treatments. I also want to, we talked about the genetic component of this and the importance of addressing this, making sure that we're screening for genetic disease and treating genetic disease. We also have partnered with the National Society of Genetic Counselors. I'd like to invite them up to just be able to know. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry. Sorry. I thought that might have been you. Well, I'm not sure if they're here then, but we are partnering with the National Society of Genetic Counselors to enhance and support the Access to Genetic Counselors Act. Ultimately, that act will recognize genetic counselors as providers with Medicare, and we recognize that, especially in some of these cases where we need to intervene early, we need to address these genetic diseases and make sure that we are engaging in and screening appropriately and identifying those at risk. Genetic screening is important, so we want to do more genetic screening, but in addition to that, we also want genetic counselors to be available for folks to be able to help navigate their diseases. I want to provide a special thanks again to all of our partners, especially Vision Health Advocacy Coalition, Alkeus Pharmaceuticals, and Johnson & Johnson for their support of this briefing today, as well as all of our other partners and members. I also do want to take just a quick moment to introduce Prevent Blindness to share just a little bit of news that's happening in the vision space today. So I'm going to invite Kira Baldonado up from Prevent Blindness. So Kira.
Hi, thanks everybody. Thanks for a few minutes on your podium here, Dan. We are really excited to share with you that today at noon, they've moved it to noon when the floor opens, we'll be introducing the Early Detection of Vision Impairments for Children Act. We're so excited that Sarah, our Director of Government Affairs, so the purpose of this act is to provide two different things: to establish grants through HRSA, to provide grants to states to implement or improve their public health systems of care for children, to make sure that there's early detection of vision problems, coordination of care, access to treatment, and then support for those who are experiencing vision loss. So all of these great things we've heard about the research, creating the cures, creating the treatments, we need to make sure they get to the individuals. So we need a strong public health system of care to find those kids, to get them to that care, and to get them the support they needed. The Act will also create a technical assistance center within the CDC to provide applied public health research to understand what works best. How can we do this to provide access to care for children? How can we make sure that the supports are there for these individuals so that they're not lucky enough to find somebody, that they will find somebody, they will have the support they need to support their vision journey. It will also conduct surveillance. We'll finally have data, and we all know the importance of data to make sure that we know where these children are, where they need to have some more supports, where we need to strengthen the public health system of care. And we'll have surveillance to understand where we need to direct the grants and the implementation of those interventions. So we're really excited. So noon today when the floor opens, the bill will be introduced. And all of you, whether you like it or not, will receive lots of notices about how to support the bill, how to advocate for its passage, how to get other co-sponsors for your representatives to join. And I do want to take a moment to mention that the bill is bipartisan. So it's being introduced by Representative Gus Bilirakis and Representative Mark Vesey of Texas. So it's taking a village, and I really appreciated the journey that it takes to get from research to an actual drug approved by the FDA. It's been kind of that same journey for creating an act and getting it introduced into Congress. Maybe not quite 14 years, but it feels like that. So there are a lot of journeys that are important for vision and eye health. Research, but also making sure that we have the access and we're finding the individuals that need that care and having the systems in place to get there. So you'll hear more about the EDV Act. That's the acronym, Early Detection of Vision Impairments in Children. But I hope all of you will support and see it passing through. So thank you. Thanks, Dan.
All right, and with that, that concludes the briefing. So again, I want to thank our sponsors and partners for helping make today's event. If you have any questions, I think we'll have a chance to stick around a little bit. We also do have a virtual reality headset for folks that are interested in seeing what some of these eye diseases look like. We don't have specifically RP and Stargardt disease, but we do have some diseases that manifest in similar ways that we're able to show you if you're interested in seeing that. So if you're interested in sticking around and trying that out, please do so and come up to the front and we'll do that for you. Thank you. All right. Isn't that a thing, right?
Right. Embrace the love.
I got this one. Well, no,
If you could look at me, please.
It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
You have fantastic presentation.
Any interest in trying the headset? Sure. I can try it out. Yeah, no, it's okay. So this is
Did marvelous.
essentially what retinitis pigmentosa actually how it appears in the eye.
Yes, definitely. Current size, right? Yeah, I'd love to get all four.
So you hear it, yeah, you hear it, but now you'll actually be able to see it. You'll find some stuff.
It's RP with RP. This is RP on the side.
The old way of doing this was just pair goggles with a hole in them. And now you try to this thing is how one of the things I used to do was your hands outside. And you don't like exactly kind of gives you an idea. You're the only one who looks like the headshot. Kind of cool. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going last it's really funny because
Dinner last evening
Okay, yes, whatever we can do to improve it, especially in rare disease. It's such a target population, there's no other solution. So really,
Did you hear it? I don't even think I told you that Snoopy's didn't make it on the plane. It arrived at
I'll say you have a similar build to my wife.
I always ask them what size you are. So I was like,
And there's a week of advocacy as well for
So there's
I'm sticking around for 2 days of love. I'm invited to try. Actually, Julia, we're invited also. Nice to meet you as well. Yes. I know you're part of the listening sessions. Yes. We are the family that already has this. It's always tough. Live in Florida?
what is this like for nostalgia? When you're on and now?
You're not gonna miss me that much.
You're gonna be good at your new job.
When you look at ratings, all of that, very strong patients, telling the FDA, telling their constituents, telling the senators or not just a specific treatment is, but the review of the treatment. It's like reviewing the mind. Sometimes, reviewing the mind.
Yeah, share that with us.
And there's
So this is your last week.
one or actually giving it for me as a scientist,
You say it like that, but it's true.
As a parent of
for example, that's why
I'll take pictures too. You wanted Yes, well, and I think that instead of at the photo to share one of them. Yeah, let's get a picture of us. It's a big day. It is a big day. Yeah, that's right.
for example, when you look at this, when you're complaining about like one trial, like two,
Let me know if they're good.
No, the Uber guy, he's like, you look different in that headshot. Well, your car looks like everybody else.
I was there. In New Orleans. Yeah, I was there.
Okay.
Probably lived there. Yeah, there was at that restaurant where all the
Yeah, that's all right.
Two. Somebody take a picture for us?
There you go.
Yes.
Are you in a photo?
Aaron, you're welcome to come in. It's up to you.
Sure.
Can you count?
Okay, so everybody,
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I should probably get to the airport. My flight leaves at 12:19.
My name is Dana.
My name is Dana. Yeah. So I thought
Here in our,
Hi. Yeah. It's very nice to meet you. Yeah, good. It was really nice to meet you too.
But we also need
Sure, come in for a picture? Of course.
You're going to count because Medicaid is Okay. Yes, absolutely.
We would love you in the picture.
Sort of a celebrity. Are you?
She has a plane to catch up.
Chin a little bit. Everybody squish in.
All right. Otherwise, I'm going to have to. 1, 2, 3. Oh, you guys look amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to get to the airport. Thank you so much. Where are you? Yeah. It's really nice to meet you.
No, I didn't do it.
Oh, are you going to some nice place? It's a good area. Okay. Yeah. Nice meeting you.
I've got a friend.
He's got all of the. Would you like to join us for lunch? When you're heading back to the airport? Yes. Okay. All right.